All right. Coach Schuman here for the Success for Life podcast. I'm with Brenden Kumarasamy. I think I said it right, which makes me proud of myself. Before we get started, we're going to talk communication today. And this guy right here with me today, he has a group called MasterTalk. They are the gurus of communication. At least we hope to be able to find the information and the tidbits that can make you become a guru of communication and how to be able to communicate with your clients, to be able to do business better, every facet, hopefully, of your life, because communication might be the single most important thing to be able to be successful in your life. And obviously, there go the theme of our podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Brenden.
Pleasure's absolutely mine, David. Thanks for taking the time.
Oh, it's great to have you on. I was excited to talk to you. Let's everyone understand a little bit of your background first, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely, David. So my story started when I was in college / university. I went to business school, and I did these things called case competition. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing basketball or baseball or rugby, I was doing presentations competitively because you wouldn't see me playing football. I'd probably break my back or something. But then as I got older, I started coaching a lot of the students in those programs, mostly for free back then because the options they had was either me or Rock. So I guess they picked me. And then I started to help them to communicate more effectively. So I accidentally got really good at this skill. So I had the idea for Master Talk a few years after that because I realized that everything that I was sharing with the students wasn't available for free on the internet. So I started making videos, and then one thing led to another, and here we are today.
Very cool. So the Master Talk that's basically a program that you guys have to be able to help people that you've developed to help people understand how to communicate better. So dive into some of the things. So you're in this competition to be able to present, basically, long and short of it, presentation competition. So what was involved in that helped you really to understand things to bring you to where you are?
Beautiful question, Coach. Here's what I would say. I think the reason I got so good at this thing so quickly was because I pretty much had some of the best coaches in the world helping me. And let me explain what I mean by this. So, how case competitions work is think of it like a sports draft. You know, like the NBA draft or the NFL draft or the MLB draft, where talent scouts go to different universities and colleges to recruit the best talent and draft them into the league, right? So it's a very simple analogy. That actually happens in the business world and many other worlds too. But in the business world, what that looks like is companies like Amazon, IBM, McKinsey, they sponsor, like they shell out tens of thousands of dollars, David, to sponsor these competitions. They get a bunch of these kids who are 19, 20, 21 years old presenting solutions to them. And a vice president at Amazon goes, I want that kid, I want that kid, I want that kid. And it becomes a recruiting tool where they hire the best students before everyone else does. And they give them really good salaries and great jobs. So that's why I initially did these competitions. So what happens is after they leave school and they get like 3, 4 job offers usually. So anyone who does these things, because who in the world would do this, right? It's a small community. They all become vice presidents at organizations by like the time they're 28. It's wild. And then they become coaches for the program. So when I started, I had this big ego because it's really hard to get into this thing. I was 19, I had a large suit on, and I got demolished by all of my coaches in the first meeting. So let's just say I learned fast.
That's good. It's important to learn fast, fail forward. And so so what's really interesting. So I got my MBA, and in my MBA program, we had a thing called financial management. And all we would do was we would get these case studies, okay, of different companies. Now we're talking the 90s here. So back then it was GE, it was JP Morgan, it was those companies, different scenarios, and then we would have to present solutions, right? So it'd be something similar like that, but obviously moving forward to maybe more to modern companies like Amazon, Google, those kind of companies. Now, so that's an important thing. So being able to obviously not only understand what the problem is, be able to figure out what the solution is, and then how to communicate it out to everybody is a critical issue. Okay. This is something that everybody deals with in business, that in every facet of business, you're dealing with it. And it's a big issue that people struggle with. What are the things that people need to understand in communication that are so important to be able to help them to become successful?
Absolutely, David. So a couple of things I would say. The first one is, what is the greatest challenge? And the follow up to that question is, how do we work on our communication way that builds momentum up over time? So let's start with the first piece, which is the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge by far, in my opinion, a lot of people think it's fear. It's actually motivation, because all of us will always have fear, but we don't have the motivation to push through it. We won't get better at communication. So I'll give you an example. With me, is a question: how would your life change if you're an exceptional communicator? We dream about our business goals, our health goals, our relationship goals. When was the last time we thought about our communication goals and actually get the result that we're looking for? We might look at our heroes in our society and say, that person makes more money than me, that person has a better family than me, that person has better six-pack that I don't. But we don't ask ourselves, oh, what is that person doing from a communication perspective that I'm not doing? That's the delta that I find a lot of business leaders don't think enough about. So I would start to dream first. That's the first step. And then the follow up on that step is to practice consistently through some exercises that I'm sure we'll talk about today, so that people can build that momentum and convince themselves first that communication is not a chore, because nobody wants to get better at doing the dishes, but rather a tool that creates impact and change, like the reason we're on the show today.
Right. And communication, or changing the way that you communicate, a lot of it involves changing your mindset, right? So you have to understand what you look like to somebody else, which could be a big issue. People don't always realize they have a view of what they think they sound like to somebody else or how they communicate, but they don't always. I've had it many times. I've coached football for 20 years. I've run a business for 18 years. And what you perceive as thinking that you are sounding like to others is not always what it comes out like. So where does the rub meet the road in that, first and foremost? Like, how do you get people to understand what they sound like to somebody else?
Absolutely. So for me, communication, David, to keep things simple for today, is like juggling 18 balls at the same time. So one of those balls is smiling, one of those balls is eye contact, vocal tone projection, storytelling. But the problem that most of us do is we try and juggle all 18 at the same time. So naturally, all of the balls fall to the floor. So instead, what I'd recommend people think about is, what is the first exercise that people can do right away to really start building momentum with their communication? So the skill that I would recommend is called the random word exercise. So all it is you pick a random word: wall, giraffe, headphone, shirt, phone, and you create random presentations out of thin air with no preparation. And what this does is it builds your resiliency as a speaker, because if you can make sense out of nonsense, you can make sense out of anything. So spend a few minutes every day. Do this with your family, do this with your colleagues, do this with your nieces and your nephews, your kids. And every day, 3 to 5 times a day, just do the random word exercise, and you'll immediately see momentum build up in your skill.
And is that part of like telling a story better? So if I'm talking about a phone, I'm not just saying I have an iPhone. I'm saying my phone is black and it's shiny and I have a nice red and silver case behind it. And when I open it up, my first app that I show is Google Mail, right? So so on and so forth, right? Is that what we're talking about?
I love that, David. But the only piece I would add to that is, one thing I tell clients, which I'll say on this podcast, of course, is we don't get rewarded for how well we do the exercise. We get rewarded on how many times we do the exercise. So what generally happens is, the first 10, 20 times somebody does this, it sounds exactly like this. Yeah, a phone is like an object, and I guess I use it to call my friends or whatever. But then over time, what happens is the judgment goes away. You don't worry anymore about the presentation. You go like, whatever, let me just tell a story. Let me talk about when I bought my first phone. Let me go into these random stories. And we start to remove the judgment. We start to be scared a lot less of rejection. So if you just do the exercise, you don't even worry about anything. Don't even worry about the framework. I've done it 3,000 times, just as an example. If you've done this thing like 100 times, you'll just get exponentially better at it in the same way that you're probably a much better interviewer than episode 1.
That's true. I think so. I would hope so.
Me too.
Otherwise, no one would be signing up anymore to come and interview with me, I guess. It'd be a dead podcast. That's really interesting. So that story is so important. It's not what the iPhone is or what it does. It's how it makes you feel and the emotions involved in it, and getting people to understand that, how it makes you feel and what the iPhone represents. As an example, tell me how some of the other exercises that you guys dive into. Very fascinating stuff.
Of course, happy to, David. So this is one of my easy 3s. So the random word exercise takes 5 minutes a day. You do it 3 to 5 times a day. You'll be set. What are the 2 other ones? The second one is called question drills. So in life, we get asked questions all the time about our businesses, about our life, from our significant others. Did you do the trash? Did you take it out? Right? We always get asked questions. But most of us are reactive to the questions that the world asks us, not proactive. So what's the lesson here? The lesson is every day for 5 minutes, reflect and guess one question that you think someone will ask you. Let's use you as an example because you're a coach, you have a successful business there. So if you did, I'm sure you've already done it, but just as an example to intensify this a bit more, let's say every day, David, for 5 minutes, you reflected on a question that you think a prospect will ask you about your service. Oh, this is too expensive, this, blah, 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 like whatever, all the other objections. But if you write it out, the answer to that question every day for a year, you'll have answered, with only 5 minutes of work every day, 365 questions about your expertise and the offer that you have. Your offer will be bulletproof with just 5 minutes of work every day. So that's an easy exercise people can take to the bank and immediately get an ROI for.
I love that. That's incredible. And so many times, and you get these objections, you write one thing down or something, you're like, oh, you know what, I got to address this. And then maybe you address that one particular thing, but there might be 50 other things, right? This one person has this objection or this objection, but you haven't addressed all of them. By doing this exercise, you can go ahead and know all those beforehand, address them in your communication, address them in your literature, right, online. And so when people go to buy, your sales process and your story is much better.
Absolutely. And then as you 100% summarized that perfectly, David. And then as you get better, let's say for example, when you get to my crazy level, which is 600-700 question drills, and I've pretty much been asked every question I could possibly get asked on communication. Even I'm pushing myself. I say yes, just so people get this. I say yes to the most random podcast guest appearances. You're obviously not one of them. This is a very obvious fit. But like I'll give an example. Last week, I was on a beer craft, like a craft beer episode. The reason I said yes, because I was just curious. Like, what are they going to ask me about craft beer? And I've never coached somebody in that industry before because a lot of them don't really invest in a coach. So I was kind of making stuff up. I was like, well, how does the craft beer? Well, I guess it would make sense here. So even I'm learning because I'm getting a brand new set of questions and it makes me better. Of course, a lot of the stuff still applies to other industries, but then I learned from the host. So the key here and why I'm saying all of this is that the question drill is a continuous process, not just a one and done thing.
Right. It gives you the ability to keep improving on what you're doing. That's really cool. And what's number 3?
Absolutely. So number 3 is so simple, David, that nobody does it. And the exercise is simply making a list of the people that you really care about, people that really appreciate you, people that help you when you need it, like your mom, your brother, your nephews, family, friends, clients that believe in you. When was the last time we sent them a 20-second video message? Just saying, hey, David, thinking about you. Love what you're doing at the podcast. Love the way you're serving people. Hope you're having a fantastic week. Nothing crazy. Like just like a 15-second. And you'll find, David, that most people are listening to this podcast. The answer is 0 because people are too scared. So I'm not even going to tell people to post on social media today. What I'm going to say is for the people that pour into you, send them a quick video message because that lesson will teach us that communication is not a chore. because a lot of the responses you'll get from those video messages will blow your mind. They'll go, wow, I never got a video message before, David. You really made my day. Thank you so much. I was having a hard day. And even if you suck, even if you're going, David, blah, you'll still get those responses, and it'll change your life.
That's really interesting. Those are three things that probably do in pieces in your at least I do in my life, but not all consistently, And it's interesting because as for 20 years as a football coach, and as a football coach, when we run like our plays and we would do what we call a no huddle system, which we communicate without huddling. So we're communicating from the sideline, the communications go out. We rep those things over and over and over again. So everybody is not just on the field, but we'll go in the classroom and we'll call out different plays and what's your responsibility. So it's interesting that and this brings me to my point, when it's a game where you lose or win based on it, you do it, right? But if there's not a defined lose or win, so if I don't do that all the time, every week, every day with my players, I'm going to lose, right? There's a loss there. But in our lives, we have losses all the time, but we don't directly connect. It's not the same thing as like a scoreboard. You're looking up and you're embarrassed by a loss, right? So you want to make sure you communicate properly for those reasons. In our lives, we don't, because there isn't always a direct embarrassment every single day. But then in the end, there's a relationship that ends in a divorce, right? A business that fails. Okay. Not the business doesn't fail because one time you didn't do something. It becomes because you consistently did, and that's one of the things I've always learned. And one of the reasons why this podcast has been successful is because we say, hey, we do these things on the field because there's a score at the end, and we get a high five if we do it, and we get a Gatorade dump if we do it, and if we don't, everyone looks at us and parents look at us like we're the worst thing ever if we lose, right? And it's just a game. But in our lives, we won't do that. We'll dance around things, and then it ends in divorce. We'll dance around things, it ends in a business failure. Is consistency the number one thing, or one of a bunch of things that have to be done in order to communicate better?
Absolutely. So let me start with this. For everyone listening to this, when this episode is over, you want to rewind the tape and re-listen to what David just said there, because that was straight gold. I completely agree with what you shared, and that was my biggest insight just listening to you, David, is the idea that the scoreboard in a basketball game, in a football game, in a sports game, you have that strong why, because we need a win. But we don't bring that burning desire into the game of communication, into the game of our life. That's why I go back to that question that we discussed a bit earlier today. How would your life change if you became an exceptional communicator? Start thinking about that, because that is the question that is going to drive the reason, that burning desire to actually do the question drill, do the random word exercise, and do the video messages. But here's another fun thing that I kind of just thought of as I was listening to you. What's fun about the game of communication is that it's a bit different than a football game in the sense that everyone's dancing around. Everyone in your industry is dancing around. I have yet to meet a human being that I haven't like pressured into diamonds that have already been doing the random word exercise, the question drills, and is an important word here, and the video messages consistently. I've yet to meet a single human being. So what does that mean? That means if you're the person to do in your industry, you will decimate your competition. You will completely annihilate them. I'll give you the best example. Let's say we take a field like accounting. One thing I ask people, you're getting me really excited about it, it's super fun. So let's say we take accounting, right? Because the outcome that I teach people, and we'll explain what that means because it ties in perfectly with what you said, is top 1% communicator in industry. So what does that mean? That means if there's 100 accountants on the field, what is that one accountant doing to separate themselves from the other 99 from a communication perspective? And what that looks like is very simple. And I asked that accountant, how many accountants do you think do the random word exercise once a day? He's going to say, well, 0. And I always respond with, no. That person is one person, and you better make sure that person is you. So the key of consistency is in any industry, except maybe like professional speaking, which is like such a tiny And just
Right.
maybe coaching. I know so many coaches don't do this, but if you just do this in your field, going back to consistency, you do it a little bit over time, you'll completely annihilate your competition. You'll hit touchdowns all the time, and they'll just sit there and take the hits, which I think is beautiful.
Well, they'll come out of there thinking that you are such an expert in what you do, so people become perceived as an expert with not doing 1/10 of this, right? So if you do this, and just from listening to, just from the exercise and myself into three simple things, not obviously, you can engage you as a coach as well and get a whole different level of it, but just those three consistent things, it allows you to be far above everybody else. You'll be perceived as the expert because you've done more of the work than anybody else, right? I mean, I'm guessing that's really what it is. But I love how you've kind of presented it in a way that it's 5 minutes a day. So there's no excuse for you to, if you don't do it, it's you justifying things. There's no excuse for you to not be able to do it because it's 5 minutes a day, which I think I've never heard presented before from a communication standpoint. Those competitions did you well, by the way. I've never heard it presented in that facet before, that you can get these things done in 5 minutes a day. You hear so much stuff where people are like, well, you got to invest, I'm talking about, read this book and read that, and all those things. Those are short-term fixes. And then most people quit on it halfway through anyway. So very, very, very interesting. What are a couple other things, before I want to dive into what coaching wise, like how you work with people. What are some other things that people can maybe take away?
Absolutely, brother. And I'm glad you got that. You're absolutely super sharp on that observation. Because that's what happened when I started going on podcasts. I kept sharing the same stuff other coaches were sharing too. And I realized people weren't implementing. And that's why I've modified my approach. Just go, okay, well, if you don't do these three things, like, what do you want me to do? I would say the last piece I'll leave you off with, which is similar to what you said, especially on the topic of books. Let's talk about that for a second. Okay, so let's say one of my guys goes, what's your book recommendation, Brett? And I do have them, don't get me wrong. But my first instinct is always, and I want all of you listening to this who are waiting for my book recommendation to take a note on this. I'll just ask them back a question, which is exactly what I asked him. Okay, let's say you read a book, okay, every week. Let's say you did. How much time would you spend in that book? Because that guy's a CEO. So he might say, like, I don't know, Brendan, I might spend an hour a week. So maybe like 10, 15 minutes a day reading that book, which is probably the answer most people would give. 45 minutes, 60 minutes. And I go, how about we do this instead, John? How about instead of reading a book every week for 45 minutes, you're going to do the random word exercise 45 times this week. How about we do that instead? Because the best way to speak, oddly enough, coincidentally enough, weirdly enough, David, is to speak. I know it sounds crazy, but you can't listen to me all day and David all day. If you want to get better like David has over the years, as a coach, as a facilitator, as a podcast host, you need to actually put in the reps. You actually need to do the interviews. You actually got to do the random word exercise. And that's why I've done well on shows. It's because I've done more than one, and that's how we get better over time.
How do you, I think people struggle with this one other part of communication, and I'm hoping you can answer this. Reading the other person. So this is where we do all those exercises. We bulletproof ourselves from a communication standpoint, but learning how to read other people and understand their facial movements, their responses. How do we practice things like that so we get the right understanding of what they're communicating to us, so then we can communicate properly back to them?
100%. Let me give an easy trick here on how to do that. It's mirroring. So what that means essentially is we just try our best to mirror the emotion of the other person. I always believe that the best communicators on the planet, David, are chameleons. So they always adapt their energy to the person they're speaking with. Let me give you a quick example because I know we got like 60 seconds here. Is in the context of introverts versus extroverts. Sometimes when I'm on a show, as an example, like say you're more of an extroverted host because you got that energy, that competitive spirit. So I'm very like you. We're very similar in that way.
Right.
So I'm like bam, bam. So I'm saying a lot of things I usually don't say. But
Right.
there's other times where I'm on a show and it's just as good. The quality is just as high. They're just as great as you are, as an example. But they're a lot more introverted. So they sound a lot more like this. Hi, Brenden. It's great to be here. So I don't speak like this on that podcast because I'll scare her, right? I'll scare her audience because their audience
Right,
is
right.
probably in the same energy length as that person. So I say something more like that. Hey, Paula, it's great to be here. Let's go ahead and get started the show. It'll be my honor, my pleasure to answer any questions. So I'm a lot more lax, right? So I tone down versus like Gary Vaynerchuk doesn't have an off switch. That guy is just going to stay at the high vote, even if he's talking to the most quiet person in the world,
Right.
which I don't really like too much. I like
Right.
adapting to that person.
Right, because he ends up just swallowing them up.
Yeah, you'll eat them up.
You eat them up, and then then they feel like they didn't get listened to. That's I always think that's the one thing that, and Gary Vee's unapologetic in how he does things, but I think that's the one thing that he could work on, because then some of those people who are not with that same energy will walk away and say, hey, you know what, he didn't just overtalk on me because he got tired of my low energy or whatever. He was willing to kind of work with it. Awesome stuff. On coaching, tell me, like, so a client comes to you, how do they work with you?
Absolutely, David. First of all, it's such a pleasure to be on your show, man. Thanks so much. We should definitely do this again. Don't be shy to.
I would love to.
Absolutely. So two ways to keep in touch. The first one is the YouTube channel. My mission is to help every human being on earth, so I definitely don't have time to coach everybody. So go check out my YouTube channel. It's MasterTalk in one word. You'll have access to hundreds of free videos on how to speak. And for those of you who are interested in coaching, feel free to just sign up for one of my free trainings on Zoom for communication. And you could register for that at rockstarcommunicator.com.
Perfect. That's it. That's very simple and nice and easy. It's been great having you on, Brenden. Really, I learned in such a short time period things that I actually haven't thought about. And that's, to me, what this is all about. Like, there are things that I haven't thought about, and I've been around for quite a while, and I never thought about some of these things. So even for me personally, I just got personally coached up by you.
Hey, two-way street, by the way. I learned so much from your analogy around the game. I'm definitely going to reuse that one. It's really good.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Brenden, for being on Success for Life podcast. Check him out on MasterTalk on the YouTube channel. Make sure you get a hold of him, and then you'll become a rockstar communicator yourself. All right. Have a great day.
You too, brother.
All right.